influencers are scared of their name being associated with a toxic brand called Israel.
Does the mob rule? Does the silent majority count?
I think there's a huge silent majority out there that is afraid to speak up.
I do think there's a difference between the mobs and the majority. Unfortunately, the mobs are really loud.
And welcome back to the Quad, everyone. It's been, as usual, an eventful week. For us here in Israel, it's been very, very mixed week because we had, of course, Memorial Day, Yom HaZikaron, and then followed by Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut, which, to be honest, felt like 2 days of Yom HaZikaron. And so it wasn't the happiest of Independence Days. But here we are with my incredible co-hosts this week, Vivian Berkovich, as usual, and our ongoing special co-host, Shoshana Keats-Jaskal, who is always there for us at any moment when our other two co-hosts can't make it. Shira's still in America, and Emily is on an important mission, as always. So, ladies, this week, what we wanted to talk about, I mean, there's been so much going on because we had Yom HaZikaron, we had Yom Ha'atzmaut, but we had the Eurovision. And it kind of triggered some thoughts in our minds about what happened in Eurovision with the votes of the jury in contrast with the votes of the popular public, the popular vote. This is what happened in Eurovision, okay? So there's Australia, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Portugal, San Marino, Spain, Switzerland, and UK gave Israel 0 points. Now, this is a good song, all right? 0 points. Not 1 point, not 2 points, 0 points. These are the countries that are obviously under the influence of the mob rule, or they just don't have the courage to say, it's a good song, or we don't agree with harassment. Now, this is the clincher. Of those countries, these are the countries that gave Israel 12 points, which is the maximum. I know some Americans don't know the system. So the maximum you can get is 12 points. Australia, Finland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Portugal, San Marino, Spain, Switzerland, and UK gave 12 points. And Ireland, Albania, Austria, and the Czech Republic gave them 10 points. You can't make this up. And it just kind of triggers these questions in my mind. Does the mob rule? Does the silent majority count? Does the mob matter? And is it a mob, which is a minority and not the majority of the people? And being in Israel makes we feel constantly kind of persecuted. We are bombarded with all of the scenes that are going on around the world. We're bombarded literally, and we're bombarded by all the stuff going on here. So maybe we've lost perspective. So I want to start with you, Vivian. Have we lost perspective? Is reality our perspective? What do you think?
Many, like 30, 40, 50% of the so-called protesters are paid operatives.
They're not even students, right?
Exactly. And so, like, that's where it gets really complicated. They seem to be controlling the streets and the campuses and the society, but are they? I think there's a huge silent majority out there that is afraid to speak up.
Well, that's what it is, isn't it? It's the bullies and the silent majority. Shoshana, you have your finger in the pulse about what's going on in America, very much so. And you belong to so many of these groups. You fight for women's causes. What do you make of this? Do you think it's perception? Do you think it's reality?
I think it's actually a really good question. And I was in the States last week, and I met with Shai Davidai, who's the professor at Columbia, who's really been blowing the whistle and calling us all to act and to protect our Jewish students at our university, or not our university campuses, but in the States. And I walked through Manhattan, and I felt safe and I felt protected. And there was actually an incident where I saw a lot of cops, and I was like, what's happening? I got a little bit nervous. So I went and I spoke with the cop and I was like, hey, what's going on? He's like, yeah, somebody's trying to raise a flag over there. I'm like, a flag? He's like, yeah, a flag, a pirate flag. I'm like, a pirate flag? He's like, yeah, pirate.
May those be our problems, the pirate flags.
Right? So I go across the street, Central Park. There's a monument to Sherman. And sure enough, there's people with Palestinian flags and keffiyehs. But there were at least, 200 cops, vans. And I felt protected. I felt safe. So I feel like there is a real a misperception, or maybe it's not a misperception, but there's a heavy accent on the agitators, the people who do hate. And there's not enough of the people who do understand that this is a conflict and that this is not something that should be taking over the streets in these various cities. And so it was actually really helpful to me to go to Manhattan and walk through the streets and feel like, okay, it's not as bad as it seems off of campus. It's a scary thing. I also watched Eurovision with my girls, and I can only tell you, God help me with this Europe. I feel like I've lost brain cells, but watching it and then seeing the difference between the judges who completely, ignored Israel, and then the crowd or the audience, the people who gave 323 points. I stood up and I'm cheering like I'm a teenager. It just felt great. So yes, I do think there's a difference between the mobs and the majority. Unfortunately, the mobs are really loud.
That's a problem. And as you're saying, they get a lot of press attention, maybe more than they deserve or maybe more than anything else. There's another poll that says that of all the students, and this goes to your point, Vivian, how many of these students are real students and how much is that from the proportion of the entire people? They did a survey on the priority list of students. Climate is up here, and Israel Gaza is like 1-2%. So again, we're not only seeing a minority of a minority, but you're saying, Vivian, half of them are getting paid anyway.
Well, I think a lot of them are. I mean, these are so many important metrics that the truth is nobody actually really understands. So, Shana, I think your experience is great, but I can tell you, having spoken to a family member who works in a major Toronto downtown hospital, and their experience is very different at work. I'm just saying, like, it's real. It's real. The threats.
It's very real.
Yeah,
it's very real. And I specifically and intentionally did not go to the campuses. I knew I couldn't handle it. I could not handle. Look, I did see people with keffiyehs walking down the street. I did. And I didn't go to those places where I knew I would be seeing people screaming intifada, because honestly, I have enough to deal with. I just really did not want to go.
Why put ourselves in these situations? I get it.
I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. And I'm not saying it's not real. It is real. I think, look, we interviewed on our podcast, on the Chochmat Nashim podcast, we interviewed students. And one was from Bryn Mawr and one was from Arizona State University. And as the granddaughter of survivors, when Michelle from Bryn Mawr told me that her parents gave her a car so that if she needed to leave campus at a moment's notice, she could.
Oh, wow.
I had chills. And the next morning when I woke up and she said to me, I just wanted to update you, since about half an hour after we finished recording the podcast, the tentifada got really loud outside of my window and it got really bad. And me and 4 other Jewish students packed a bag and used my car.
Of course.
So I know it's bad. I know it's happening. And the idea that a Jewish student has to leave their campus of fear is outrageous.
Absolutely.
It's terrifying to me. And it's not something I thought I would see in my lifetime. And it's devastating. I'm not pretending it's not there. I just feel like the more that it seems that it's the majority, the more people will get on board. And so it's really important for us also to say that there are a lot of people who know this isn't the right way to go.
I agree. And I think those are the people that reacted to the Eurovision, but they're still not the people who are talking broadly. Because again, another survey, a Harvard Capps-Harris survey, says 80% of registered voters say they support Israel more in the war than Hamas. I mean, imagine 20% have supported Hamas. Most people want a ceasefire, but they know that Hamas has to be eliminated. Now, you could say the numbers could be better, but that's pretty good. 80% of people have not lost their brains in America. And it's obviously the older people who feel their way, and the younger you get, they don't, which begs the question, what's going to happen in 20 years? I've got a friend whose daughter's in Oxford going through a horrible time. Again, being harassed and bullied and not being allowed to go to different places. It's honestly, I can't believe we got to this point, but I think ignoring the problem for the last 20 years or just digging our heads in the sand did not help. And I think we're very good at doing that.
I agree.
We're very good at doing that. So
I think it's to our intense detriment that we did not pay attention to what was going on.
100%.
We have been asleep at the wheel. We thought they would not get far. We did not watch the Qatari money. We did not watch the BDS. We did not understand that this was part of a larger plan and a larger long strategy. And now we are. It's the same as watching Gaza and not realizing what was happening. We have been asleep at the wheel. We thought everything would be okay, and here we are.
Here we are indeed. And I think that what we're saying, something between what we're all saying. Yes, it may be a very, very noisy minority, a minority that bullies people, the mob. But, Shoshana, like you're saying, if that is what people see as perception, that's not good for us, regardless whether it's a majority or a minority. So I guess our call to action is silent majority. And I know you're out there. I get so many messages from so many people.
Get louder.
Get louder. Let's just get louder and bring sense back into this crazy world. And now to unpack more of this reality versus perception riddle that we're in, somebody who is very experienced in analyzing, developing, and really looking at what a country's brand is, what's the makeup of that brand, and how we can influence it, my good friend Joanna Landau. We are so honored to have a very special guest with us on our show this week. This is a woman who we've been friends for over 30 years. Gosh, that makes her sound really old. But Joanna is a specialist in country branding, but I think even more significant, she's the mother of influencer branding or influencer trips, and has recently written a fascinating book called Ethical Tribing, which I had the privilege of reading before everybody else. And really, Joanna knows what it takes, because it's not just her feelings. She polls and she understands sentiments towards Israel. And Joe, I remember very clearly, because I have a good memory for these things, when Netta Barzilai won at the Eurovision, which is the last time Israel won, you wrote an analysis the next day saying, you see everyone, not everybody hates us, people are interested in other things, and we shouldn't be so paranoid. Joe, this has been a different Eurovision. We're in the middle of the war. Do you still think the same? Give us your kind of quick analysis of what happened.
I think, firstly, thank you for having me on the show, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I always look at research. I've been polling and checking perceptions, especially of young people towards Israel for the last 6 years at least, from my own organization. And before that, I always looked at polls. And I think that most of the world, the Jewish world, especially the Israeli people, and now there's sort of the creation of a sort of a general consensus that everybody hates Israel. This is not true. And if anything proved that to us, then it's this year's Eurovision, which on the one hand, we saw the tremendous efforts by the anti-Israel movement, which has turned into some kind of horrible, insane, anti-Semitic, pro-terrorist movement that's taking advantage of these young people. So they went to all the efforts to try and ruin it, but the world spoke up. And it's because they were anonymous and they were able to do that without taking the risk of it affecting their brand. And I think that's what a lot of people are not realizing. Influencers are scared of their name being associated with a toxic brand called Israel. And that's why we saw the gap between the judges and the general public. Their name is associated with a vote that was given by their country. And we see if you go into the breakdown, we see that there are countries that gave Israel, a lot of countries, the last position. And I think that is the result of a very, very aggressive, frightening, mob-like behavior towards influencers, and they just were scared into putting Israel in that position. But for so many people to rank Israel in such a low position when their name is associated, as compared to millions who put Israel in the popular vote in second place, there's something going on here much more sinister than a silly music competition that we can argue about the quality of.
And what is that sinister something else? How would you identify it? How would you explain it? Because, of course, what I want to ask next is, how do you address it? You embolden silent voters.
Yeah, I've been saying this ever since I started 15 years ago. The data was showing in public opinion polls that there is overwhelming support for Israel, even in countries where you don't feel that there is. And if it's not support for Israel, it's definitely not support for the other side. It's just, I don't know, or I don't care. Okay, 15 years ago. Right, a lot of people don't care. And then, of course, there's the BDS movement that started 22 years ago or so. And I found the BDS movement to be pretty ineffective in its efforts because they tried very hard, and yet Israel was doing extremely well. Between 2010 and 2020, we had a golden era of Israel being the startup nation, won the Eurovision, our tourism almost doubled. Of course, all these different things going on, the food, as I mentioned, we were doing really well. So you look at this BDS movement and you think, oh, they didn't do so well. And then what I realized happened on the 7th of October is that what happened on the ground happened on the virtual battleground as well. And it's almost like, I think what was going on was this very slow, very patient building up of coalitions with, the like-minded people. So in the case of BDS, it's the oppressed. So they did this whole intersectionality thing where they went to any group that was oppressed and said, we're like you, and so you should support us. Black Lives Matter, all the stuff that I'm sure you've discussed many times before. But they were almost like sleeper cells. They appeared to be almost like the Hamas made Israel think that they're quiet and they're not doing anything. And then suddenly on October 7th, and we know this now, tens of thousands of bots were operated. It's definitely been orchestrated, okay? And it's been orchestrated. I think this is a plan that started 25 years ago. And the one thing that we have to give them an enormous amount of credit for, two things. One is the sophistication and the strategic thinking. Really, they are outsmarted us many, by many levels. And the second thing is patience. They had a lot of patience to quietly build up these support alliances. They worked with coalitions and alliances. So if you sign up for Black Lives Matter, in the charter, you're signing up that you support for BDS as well. Okay, so you're against it. The whole, if you're a queer, you're now a queer for Palestine. If you're a feminist, you can't be a Zionist. All these different things, super smart. Unions, same thing, sitting on the whole latent anti-Semitism thing. They're taking all our money, blah, 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 blah. Whites, non-white, the whole thing. Okay, so let's go to the solution, okay? And I think there are several levels to this. I absolutely think that we should not stop doing what I call traditional advocacy to Israel. The facts, the information, all that stuff, it's all important, because if there's one thing that the Jewish people have always believed in, is the truth. To strive for the truth and to connect always with truth. We don't like faking stuff. We don't like, this is a real part of our DNA.
So true.
And I believe very strongly that we should continue talking about it, and we shouldn't give up on our own values because the other side is doing something very sinister. However, we have to recognize that the world has changed. We have to recognize that this new generation is a digital native. They don't operate in the same way that we did. They know a lot about very, very little. They are clueless about most things going on in the world unless they decide to go very, very deep, which they can do, and which TikTok and Instagram encourage them to do. But it takes them down a rabbit hole of misinformation. And if you go online and you start seeing the amount of content that has been uploaded into the blogosphere or whatever you want to call it by the other side with just untruths. And then they're getting all their information from there. Al Jazeera, of course, is right there. Qatar is funding it. So what's going on right now is that you've got this axis of evil and axis of good. And our problem is that these young people have been brainwashed into thinking that we are part of the axis of evil, when in fact, the truth is that we're part of the axis of good. The way to stop that part is to understand that we have to start operating like they are. Our advice, I was hired by one of the government ministries to recommend what should we do with all of the civic advocacy going on. The government does what the government does, but there's a lot of civic advocacy going on. Ever since October 7, you and I know that until October 7, most of the civic, non-governmental advocacy wasn't done by the Israeli people. It was done by the Jewish people outside of Israel, okay? At major efforts, we're talking about a triple-digit $1 million industry. And what is going on right now is that since October 7th, tens of thousands of Israelis got involved. They suddenly discovered how bad Israel's image was. And what happened after October 7th is that tens of thousands of Israelis got involved in pro-Israel advocacy. Until that point, they really weren't that involved. Somebody else was responsible. It was the responsibility of the government, the responsibility of the Jews. Doesn't matter. Not my problem. I send my kids to the army. I'm doing that. I'm not bothered by it. And it's because actually we don't send our kids here in Israel to campuses and they come home saying, oh, I'm fear for being, for my life or whatever, or I don't want to show my Jewish identity. We don't sense what the Jewish people sense. And therefore the Israelis weren't in the game. Then after October 7th, the Israelis got in the game and there was just this energy that couldn't be harnessed. And they were like running in every which direction. Imagine having an army, but no leadership, no strategy, no intelligence. Israel needs to have a movement that is private sector led, civic movement, supported by the government in the sense that the government provides the infrastructure, the financial basis to be able to have an actual movement, okay? But it doesn't tell it what to do. It doesn't lead it from the front. It pushes it from the back, exactly like the BDS movement. The BDS movement is not a bunch of nice, friendly students. It's Barghouti who started it all those years ago, long after he was a student, okay? And they infiltrated the campuses in a very smart way, because until you're 24 or 25, your brain is not fully developed and therefore very easily manipulated. And Qatar bought up all of the, humanities faculties and so on, not so much the science faculties, the maths faculties, because that's where, rational critical thinking comes. Information might be of value. And so they did a very, very smart job. They created this kind of perfect storm. And we sat there and kept on thinking that it was about the facts and the figures and the information, and that if we stick to the truth, we will win. Unfortunately, the facts simply don't end up proving that theory. And I feel that October 7th was testament to how ineffective only doing pro-Israel political advocacy is. We have to get through to these kids from a completely different space. And that's where thinking of Israel as a product that needs to be marketed and sold, and people need to buy it because they want to, and not because they have to, because their grandparents told them to. My whole book is about, this isn't just about non-Jewish kids. This is about your Jewish grandchildren. Give them a reason to want to engage with Israel. They don't have to. But the problem is that Israel is such a great country that they would want to if only they knew what it had to offer. So it's all about going with your strengths. When you're young, you're actually motivated by completely different things. It's not facts, figures, information, truth. You're motivated by being part of a group. You're motivated by virtue signaling. You're motivated by other things. And then the way to do that is, what we recommended is we have to set up this movement where the way this movement works is that we work together. We work in a synchronized fashion. One of the major problems, what we defined as the problem when we wanted to find the solution, and I'm talking now about Israel advocacy in Israel, was that we're disorganized, we're not synchronized, and we're not strategic.
There's no leadership,
we're
Joe.
not using...
There's no leadership on this.
There's not going to be. I want to align expectations. There's not going to be a leader that says, do this.
We're famously the stiff-necked people who, even when Moses brought down the tablets
Wasn't
from
good enough.
Sinai,
We argued.
why should we listen to you?
Yes.
So, I'm listening with really rapt interest, and I hope that they receive and act on the recommendations that you and the other consultant made. But you spoke earlier of the Jewish DNA. What you're recommending is totally not aligned with Jewish DNA, just to be provocative. And the other thing, we know we have a pretty good idea of where central command is for the axis of evil, as you've described it. The possibility of the good side having a remotely comparatively strong control center, I find kind of fantasy, but I really hope I'm wrong.
Do I think we're all going to be united and work together and it's all going to be marvelous? No, I live in this world and I recognize it. But there's two things going for us. One is, which is different to the BDS. I call it the BDS, but like the anti-Israel movement. One is truth really is on our side. We don't have to manipulate reality. They do. They have to create narratives that aren't real. And they have to lie, which we don't. Much easier. Second thing is the silent majority. They're still with us. And I can tell you that from the latest data from a week ago, there's been an increase in support for Israel for the first time since February, and a decrease in support for the Palestinians. Because the world doesn't like what's going on and what this anti-Israel movement has morphed into. And that is something that we can start focusing on. I don't think this is about whether people agree or disagree, whether there's a genocide or not. I think this is about a silent majority that's sitting there and saying, why are you being so mean to this lovely looking 20-year-old singer who's like singing the nicest song? Why are you being so mean to her? It's like bullying.
It's a
This is
a lot
bullying.
of sympathy factor. Absolutely.
Okay, there's a sympathy factor that we now need to start tapping into. And the only reason I got involved in the Eurovision, other than the fact that I think it's a major advocacy / positive promotion of Israel event, it's because it's very political, so it's an advocacy related as well, was because in the odds, in the bettings, Israel was 8th to win. And I thought it was a good song, and it was representative. And to be honest, when I got into it, and we did this campaign called Mission Hurricane to just encourage people to vote, which every country does for their songs, the objective of the campaign, and this is where strategic thinking comes in. It's not just acting. It's not just let's vote because it's the right thing to do. No, we sat there, and I was responsible for strategy. Each person was responsible for different things. We all did it voluntarily, by the way. Nobody was leading us, okay? But we were synchronizing everybody, and the objective was this: if we get in a good position in the Eurovision, I'm not doing it to tell the world we're right. I'm not doing it to tell the BDS and the anti-Israel movement they're wrong. I think the Jewish people need a bit of wind beneath their wings to keep plodding through this horrible situation that we're in. The Israelis need to feel a wind.
100%, 100%.
And that's what happened on that day.
Yeah,
it was about us coming together. And you saw that moment.
It was...
No, it's not me.
No,
it's everybody.
We needed that. We really needed that.
And it was really fantastic.
The way to do this is to proactively identify opportunities where you can be strategic about it. It's time limited. You can get the best people to rally around a short project and get those quick wins. And the more wins you'll get, the more we'll create an alternative narrative. But even if we just tap into that narrative and work together, even small groups, we can make a very, very big difference.
Look, all I want to say is it has been fascinating, as I knew it would be. But Jo, the best news you've given me is the fact that the government are listening to you.
They're listening.
And that to me,
but
I
want
feel
to say
better already that they've taken the best people to give them advice, which is something that we've been praying for years. Only the most professional people and the most experienced people. And so for that, you've given us some good news today. Thank you.
But for your viewers, don't wait for the government. It's going to take too long and it's too fragile. Don't wait for the government.
Thank you. Everyone follow Vibe Israel and follow Joanna Landau on LinkedIn. She puts all of her pearls of wisdom, and everybody should be following Joanna. You're a guru in this field. God bless you, and thank you for everything you do.
Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you.
Again, another week full of scumbags. Shoshana, I'm sure you have a few choice picks yourself. Choice picks. Who's your scumbag?
My scumbag are all of those judges of the Eurovision who couldn't get over themselves and give Eden Golan a point, 2 points, whatever it was, and be honestly judging the song and the competition, who were so woke and so, what is it called, virtue signaling, that they were like 12 points to this person and no points
Progressive.
to Israel. You know what, Valerie? We don't need you. We don't need you. That's my scumbag.
Which jury admitted? The Norwegian jury admitted?
Oh, yeah, the Norwegian jurist admitted that he was like, I don't know why Israel got 8 points from our judges. I don't know who did it, but it wasn't me. Don't worry. It was like, oh, hi, outing yourselves completely.
Everything except the actual song. And that really,
unbelievable.
I mean, it just shot them in the face. I just enjoyed that moment. In a horrible few days, it was a little moment of enjoyment. So yes, worthy scumbags, all those so progressive, so woke juries that they couldn't actually look at the music and look at the song and be decent. Fantastic scumbag, Shoshana. Vivian.
Gosh, I'm so intimidated. But I'll try. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting that we've been talking today about, is it real? Is it not real? But we're all clearly obsessed with Eurovision, which to our North American dominant viewers
means nothing.
Yeah, because you don't even know what it is. I didn't know what it is until I lived here, but it's like American Idol on steroids. It's been around for decades, the Eurovision contest. It's a huge thing. And she is my scumbag, but Bambi Thug. I love her name. I think it's just brilliant. She is Irish. She was the Irish contestant representing Ireland at Eurovision. Ireland, as we know, they have a big hate on for Israel, and they're not so good about Jews historically. Bambi Thug is non-binary, of course, and her whole shtick is very, well, you can look her up, okay? Very goth, very out there, very heavily made up. And very witchy and very, very outspoken about Israel, participating, being there, just so beyond classless. And so, I mean, I kind of hate her because I love the name Bambi Thug. I want to be Bambi Thug. But I hate her because of everything she embodies, which is just stupid, blind, ignorant hatred. Even if you hate Israel and even if you hate Jews, it's a music competition, for goodness sake. Just shut up.
She was disgraceful.
She was disgraceful.
But the beauty, the happy ending is that we were number 5 and they were number 6. And we just jumped right over that silly witch. Anyway, fantastic, worthy scumbag indeed. And it seems like our scumbags this week are very Eurovision oriented, because it's something that we could just express all our frustrations on and then get a win, which is what we really needed. And I think that it was a win in the end for Israel in so many ways. But my scumbag is, I don't know his name, but he's that disgraceful German journalist who, in the main press conference of the singers, of the finalists of the Eurovision competition, asked Eden Golan whether she didn't think for a moment that her presence there was putting everyone else in danger, accusing, again, victim blaming, as we've seen since the beginning of this conflict. Here it is.
Have you ever felt that by being here, you bring risk and danger for other participants and public?
You don't have to answer that question if you don't want to.
Why not?
If you want to answer, okay, please.
I think we're all here for one reason and one reason only. And the EBU is taking all safety precautions to make this a safe and a united place for everyone. And so I think it's safe for everyone, and we wouldn't be here for any other reason.
Good.
Even though her manager said to her, you don't have to answer this question, she did, and she did it so sweetly.
And she handled it so graciously.
So graciously.
Really
but yeah. I want to focus on that scumbag. You are a journalist from Germany, of all places. The last person in the world who should be actually telling an Israeli Jew that she is endangering everybody when everybody's bullying and harassing her and out for her blood, that she needed the Shabak and she needed the Mossad to protect her. And you're blaming her for showing up and endangering you because you would be in danger? Disgraceful. You are the scumbag of all scumbags, and I really hope, and I've got a niggly feeling, because Germany's good about this, I've got a nice niggly feeling that somebody read you the riot act when you went back home because you embarrassed yourself and you embarrassed your country. That's my scumbag of the week. I needed to get that off my chest. All right. Heroes always ending up on a positive note. Vivian, you always have epic heroes for us. Who is it this week?
Well, I'm just trying to be thematically sort of, consistent. So since you've basically stolen my hero, I'm going to, my heroes are the family members who took the stage at Hostage Square on Erev Yom Ha'atzmaut, the night of Independence Day in Tel Aviv. We talked about it earlier, what a sort of somber Independence Day it was. And for those of you who haven't been to Israel, on what we call Erev Yom Ha'atzmaut, the night of Independence Day, it's raucous, it's crazy, it's fun. It's a party, like a street party like no other. And this year I walked over with my daughter to the Hostage Square ceremony because we didn't know what else to do with ourselves. It was nice on the way. We cut through a few playgrounds and the kids were out with their silly string and laughing, and they should be because they're little and they don't really get the gravity of the moment, and they shouldn't. They got plenty of time for that. And that was kind of sweet to see. But then we got to the square, and I've been there so many times over the last 7 months, unfortunately. And we always go to the part that's less crowded, like the backstage where they have a big screen, and you couldn't move and you couldn't breathe. And we learned later there were over 100,000 people.
Wow.
There's never been, yeah.
That's incredible.
There's never been churn. Yeah, it was, we could feel it. And it was a really, really beautiful ceremony. They had all kinds of speakers, religious, secular, people, who were hostages and have been released, with family members who are still in captivity, and Druze and Arab and Jewish, and it was everything, and it was so Tel Aviv. It was so inclusive. It was also desperately sad, and I watched these people whose hearts are being just torn apart every day, as are ours, but we're not in their shoes. And I thought, wow, you get up every day and you do it, and you're coming out here on such an important night to be with us. And, every single one of the 100,000 plus people who was in that crowd, like myself, just didn't know what to do with ourselves. But they led, and they're helping us more than we're helping them, is how I
100% agree with you.
So they're all my heroes. I don't know how they get up and brush their teeth in the morning, but they do. It was extraordinarily moving.
They have been the heroes, constant heroes, and they remain the heroes. I just have to say that there was a lot of criticism around the official Independence Day ceremony. People were calling for its cancellation, that it wasn't the year. And I have to say, I watched it on TV, and it was really tasteful. It was done honestly, almost as a continuation of Remembrance Day, of Memorial Day. It didn't feel like a party. It wasn't festive. And I thought I was very surprised and impressed with the way that was handled. I have to say, I know a lot of people were against having it. And I know that the hostage square did the kind of the turning off of the torches, and they have every right to do anything that they see fit. But I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised by the very, very tasteful ceremony of what normally is a party, but that was done in very good taste, mainly talking about October 7th in the main ceremony of the government. So I'll say that. Back to our heroes. Shoshana, do we have some heroes from you this week?
Well, first of all, it's very hard to follow those heroes, and I agree with you 100%. There's nothing to say about the people who are living every tortured second of their lives. Sorry, you hear the jets. My heroes, honestly, are the Jewish students on campus who are standing proud and standing tall and standing against these mobs and the tentifadas and I don't know who these people think they are. You have to have a bracelet to come into this section of the campus, and you have to identify as this, and you have to renounce your Judaism. That, F you. Who do you think you are? I can only tell you that if I was on campus, I would be arrested. There is no way that any little pisser is going to keep me off of any part of campus because I'm a Jew and I'm a Zionist. There is no way. And these kids, they stand tall and proud, and they stand against the bullies, and I am in awe. I am in awe of their poise, of their strength, because it is not easy.
And
I know a lot of people in Israel.
The 20-year-old.
I'm telling you, I think a lot of people in Israel are like, oh, whatever. No, I think people have to understand it is not easy to stand against this mob. It's against a tidal wave of not only hate against you, but of the way people think you're supposed to be now, right? You're actually going against that massive current. And it takes a lot of strength. And they are my heroes today, really, because I'm amazed with how they are able to keep themselves together and not arrested.
Hats off to those students, proudly Jewish, shining a light in contrast to those Jews who are basically joined forces with the enemy, that somehow allowing themselves to be tokenized. And so, yeah, good for them. Worthy heroes. So my hero, which Vivian claims I stole from her, but I think she's everybody's hero this week, Vivian, is Eden Golan. How this 20-year-old girl, the poise, the grace, not only of going through that harassment and bullying, she had to change the floor. First of all, they didn't want her there at all. Then they changed the lyrics of her song. Then she gets there, she has to be under armed guard at all times. Then somebody says they don't want to be on the same floor as her. Then she goes to the competition. She gets booed in rehearsals. She gets booed by the crowd. And she has to go everywhere with an armed guard. She can't go to the parties. She can't go to any of the reunions, of the gatherings of all the artists. She is completely separate to everybody. And she puts up with that terrible journalist, answers sweetly, with grace, not bitter. That up until today, that girl hasn't said one bitter thing, one angry thing out of her mouth. It's peace and love. We should be so proud of her. She represented Israel and the Jewish people in the best possible light there could be. And she sang like the angels, and she's 20 years old.
Write her on a symphony, play it with me, look into my eyes and see. People walk away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told two boys don't cry?
I didn't even think, it's very isolating. I didn't realize that I didn't think about that she couldn't even go to the parties, that she had to be like mamash isolated. That is, wow. That's amazing.
And on that note of a little bit nugget of victory that we can feel this week, and praying again that our hostages come home as quickly as possible, back to their homes, back to their families, to give them some joy, return them their souls that are currently being held hostage in Gaza. We pray that will happen by next week. Thank you so much, Shoshana, for being a wonderful guest co-host. Vivian, sister in arms, and we'll see you next week.